Hi everybody. In today's lecture, we're going to be going through a bunch of different things, most of which are to do with scripting in Unity. So we'll be continuing from the type of things that we were talking about last week. And this week we're going to be dealing with how to play sounds, how to detect collisions, how to respond to collisions, how to detect if the player, for example, is in a certain area or collides with a certain object, and so on. So this is going to be divided into a bunch of small videos, each of which corresponds to one section of the lecture. And the slides for the lecture are also available on the Moodle page. So this is part one. And part one is going to be about playing sounds. So this is pretty straightforward, and we won't even need any kind of scripting in order to do this part. So, how do we play sounds in Unity? Well, we can basically directly attach sound files to any game objects in Unity that we want. And in general, what this will mean then is that these sounds get played whenever the object is instantiated. In other words, whenever a scene boots up that contains that object. So, you do this by creating an audio source component on the object and then dragging a sound file into the audio clip field of this component. So let me show you what I mean by this. This is an audio source component that has been added to a Unity object, game object. And then this thing here, beep03, is the name of an actual sound file that we have now associated with this audio component on that object. So let's have a look at this in action. So this is a very simple Unity scene that I have made. It just consists of a plane and a bunch of these cubes hanging in the air, and I've put in a first-person controller as well. So when I run it, I can simply wander around this world, and all we hear at the moment is the usual footsteps from the first-person controller. So let's break out of this for the moment. And I'm going to select one of these cubes, this one here, and we are going to add an audio component. So add component down here in the inspector, audio, and audio source, which is the audio source component that we want. Okay, so we get this added onto the object, and the first field in this is the audio clip field. And if we want to add an audio file into this, the first thing we have to do is we have to load that audio file up as an asset. So I've created a folder called audio here, and within that I have an asset here which is called beep03. This is just an MP3 file that I grabbed from somewhere, and I would have imported it by saying import new asset and then locating the file wherever it is on my disk. Okay, so let's assume you've found an audio file that you want to use. Then to go back to my audio source component associated with the cube, here it is. I can click over here, and then this will show me the list of audio files which are available as assets within this particular project. Now, most of these other audio files are probably ones that were loaded up as part of the standard assets package, which I loaded. So you'll see footsteps, for example, obviously associated with the first person controller. So I'm going to choose my beep sound, which I've already loaded as an asset. So we see beep appearing here. Now, there's lots of fields here within the audio source. I'll talk about them, some of them, in a few moments. But for now, let's just look at this one, which is play on awake. That will be, by default, checked, which means that when the object wakes up, when the scene starts, it will play the sound. I'm also going to click loop here, which will mean that rather than just playing the sound once, it will repeat it over and over again. So let us try this out. Okay, so that's my beeping sound. As you can see, it is very annoying. What you'll also notice is that when I move around within this scene, the beeping sound stays the same. Which possibly is not what we want. But but might well be what we want if what you're looking for is some background music or kind of ambient audio soundtrack within your game, in which case you can simply attach it to any object that you want. Now, suppose we want to make this thing kind of use what we call 3D spatial audio, which basically would mean that as the player gets closer to the source of the sound, then the sound is going to get louder. So the way this works is that the first person controller, i.e. the player, has a thing called an audio listener attached to it. Now, you might notice in your Unity scenes, when you throw in a first person controller, it gives you a warning where it says there are 2 audio listeners within this scene. That's because the main camera also has an audio listener. So normally best practice here will be to delete the main camera when you insert a first person or a third person controller, because they have their own cameras anyway. So what does this audio listener do? Well, basically Unity uses an audio listener to detect the distance between the player and the audio source, and then can play the sound accordingly, i.e. play it louder or play it quieter. And it also can add left-right stereo effects. Now we control this by setting something called a spatial blend within the 3D sound settings. So within the audio source, down here, there's a field called spatial blend. By default, that's set to 2D. And effectively what that means is that the sound will be played at the same volume wherever you are within the scene. If you roll this over to 3D, however, it means it will just use proper spatialized 3D sound for that particular audio source. So let's flick back into Unity and try this out. Okay, so I've got my cube selected again, and then I'm going to have a look at these settings down here. There it is, spatial blend. So I'm going to change spatial blend all the way over to 3D sound. And that's all I'm going to do, and then I'm going to try running this again and see what happens. Okay, we should be able to notice now that the beeping sound is a bit quieter. However, as I approach this cube, it gets much louder. As I move away from it, it gets quieter. So our 3D sound thing seems to be working nicely. Now, some other settings that you might want to be aware of here with the 3D sound are things like distance, minimum distance and max distance. Max distance is the maximum distance from which the sound will still be audible. So, for example, if you only want the sound to be audible within 10 meters of the object, then you might set this to 10. And what you also might do is change this from logarithmic roll-off to linear roll-off. And then we should see the effect of that. Okay, I can hear the beeping, so I'm assuming it's within 10 meters. It's louder as I go closer. But when I go beyond 10 meters, which is obviously about here, I can't hear it anymore. Obviously, I could have audio sources attached to the other objects in the scene as well, and similar kinds of considerations would apply. Okay, there's many other settings here. Pitch, we can change the pitch of the sound, we can change the overall volume of it. Let's try ramming the pitch down a fair bit and making it quieter, see what happens. Okay, you can see that's a deeper sound. Not surprisingly, if we turn the pitch in the other direction, pitch it upwards, we're going to get a higher pitch sound. Now, effectively what Unity is doing here is a form of real-time audio processing. So probably you're better off, if you want a higher pitched beep, to actually put it into some kind of sound editing software and make a higher pitched beep and use that instead. You can set stuff like reverb here as well. You can set stereo effects and some other things as well. Okay, back to my lecture slides. What have we got here? Oh yeah, finally, just a tip here. If you're using a third-person controller and getting weird stereo effects, i.e. the sound gets louder instead of quieter and facing away from the sound, then do this. Disable the audio listener on the camera, create an empty game object, add an audio listener to that, and then attach that to the controller. This is some kind of bug, may not even be relevant in the current version of Unity. Okay, so that's it for sound for the moment. So this is the first of a bunch of videos, and I'm going to wrap this up here and continue in the next video.